Is an individual who truly embodies the spirit of St. Peter's University. Many of you already know him, perhaps as a former classmate, student, teacher, or colleague. But today we have the privilege of welcoming back one of our own, Dwayne David Paul, class of 2008. Dwayne's journey is nothing short of inspiring. He is a Brooklyn-born son of immigrants from Trinidad and Tobago. He earned his bachelor's degree in theology here at St. Peter's, but his story didn't end with graduation. He returned to serve our community as the assistant director of campus ministry, where his passion for service and his commitment to inclusivity touched the lives of countless students. He also served as an adjunct lecturer in theology and Latino studies. While we were disappointed to see him go in 2017, the places he has gone since then, Dwayne's journey has taken him to the forefront of interfaith dialogue and social justice advocacy. He has obtained a master's degree in philosophy and religious studies from Yale, and he is a leader in the Greater Hartford Interfaith Action Alliance. Last year, he co-founded Religion in Revolt, a digital platform whose mission is to develop and promote the liberation work of faith communities. Through his writing for esteemed publications like America Magazine and the National Catholic Reporter, he continues to challenge, inspire, and provoke thought. Today, as we welcome Dwayne back to our campus, we do so not only with pride, but with a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the impact he had during his time here, but also the great work he has gone on to accomplish, carrying with him the values and principles instilled in him here. Thank you for coming, Dwayne. The stage is all yours.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for having me. That was only a little bit embarrassing. I'm really grateful to be back home and to be here with y'all. And I hope that over the course of our time together, we can build on our already existing relationships, build some new relationships, and maybe build some new knowledge together. All right. We're working. So, it's 1845. And Frederick Douglass just finished writing his first autobiography, the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, a slave, at about age 27. It would go on to sell over 30,000 copies in the 15 years between its publication and the start of the Civil War. It's on the short list of the most important books in American literature. It's part of what propels Douglass from being a fugitive to an abolitionist leader, world-renowned public speaker, the most photographed person of the 19th century, and ultimately an American diplomat before his death. So there's not much record, I should say, for this next part. So I just like to fill in some of the details with projections of my own foolishness onto the situation. And so I imagine Douglass meets with his editor. His editor says, "Fred, you just completed a masterpiece of American literature. This could change the world. What will you do next?" And Douglass responds, "I'm gonna mess with it. And I'm a writer, and I'm also annoying to work with. So I like to imagine it like that, and I get it." He actually does change it though. And he gives us some of the reason why. He says in the preceding chapters of his first-person autobiography, he has tons of really critical things to say about Christianity and the American church in particular. And he doesn't want that to be confused with a sort of hatred of the religion. And so added on to this first-person story are just 6 or 7 pages long critique of American Christianity for its support of slavery. He juxtaposes the slave-holding Christianity with the religion described in the gospel. contrasting the violence and corruption of the former with the love and peace found in the latter. He says, quote, "I love the pure, peaceable, impartial Christianity of Christ. I therefore hate the corrupt, slave-holding, women-whipping, cradle-plundering, partial, hypocritical Christianity of this land." Tell us how you really feel, Fred. So after about 5 pages, he devotes the last, say, 2 or 3 pages. I'm not a historian, but what feels like one of the first diss tracks in American history, where he takes this really popular Southern hymn sung in churches throughout, and frankly, like sung in churches throughout the nation, called "Heavenly Union," and he writes like a sort of verse for verse parody of it, really making plain. So I put up side by side the sort of the verses of the actual the first stanza of the hymn with what he writes. Sans context, not a word of context. He just sort of says his last bit of stuff, and then he says, "And now a parody." And it goes on like this for an uncomfortably long time. And so it just, I'm not going to sing for you. You're welcome. But come, saints and sinners, hear me tell how pious priests whip Jack and Nell, and women buy and children sell, and preach all sinners down to hell, and sing of heavenly. And it just sort of goes on and on and on. And then the book just sort of ends. So I also think it's the first mic drop recorded in American history. So he does this for 3 pages, and then does the sort of typical 19th century salutation. Yours truly, love and peace, Frederick Douglass, 1845, end. So, I take several points from Douglass's intervention that I think are instructive. And instructive for us today. One is the quieter part. There's no such thing as a politically or socially neutral religion. In times of crisis, and unfortunately, there always seems to be times of crisis, we have to pick a side. Another way of saying that is religions are already always engaged in public life. I imagine that was as much of a challenge for his readers as it is for us today. They were also worried about polarization and national unity. And spoiler alert, a really important conflict happens about 15 years after he publishes this. I'm sure they would also sigh a deep sigh and say, "Oh boy, here goes Pastor again, preaching about abolition. I wish he would just let politics be politics and let church be church." I get it. I'm tired. You're tired. Your mamas are tired. And it feels as if everything is on fire and crying out for our attention. But here we see the sort of mistake in the second part highlighted in Douglass's both his poem and his short critique of American Christianity. That desire to sort of withdraw from public life and withdraw from political life into this totally separate thing called religious life. Right? I wish we could set aside politics and just do religion, whatever the religion is. It assumes that the I in question isn't already and always political. As if our faith traditions don't already have really compelling accounts of life together. So this can sound, really pie in the sky or overly broad, but I spend my time writing about, the absolute basics of human life that are increasingly out of reach for people. Rent that's too high, pay that's too low, school meals for kids, housing for seniors, all the money that the government takes out of our pockets and pours into militaries abroad, and the climate crisis that Western governments are abandoning poor and working people to. So I came to St. Peter's. I haven't said this out loud until today, but I came to St. Peter's 20 years ago this year. And I graduated in 2008. And this was a really formative time in my life, obviously. And this time was shaped by things like the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq, the government abandoning and then criminalizing poor black people in New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina. And just as Dr. Konakia was handing me my diploma, I looked across the Hudson River and saw Lehman Brothers melting down and kicking off the Great Recession. Dr. Konakia said, "Good luck." Congratulations, good luck, bud. It was a great time. What do you say? That was the world that I graduated into. This is totally fine. But enough about me. What about the world you're graduating into? Yeah, that deep sigh, right? So buckle up, it gets really depressing. For the past few years, both maternal mortality rates and early childhood health markers have been trending in the wrong direction, generally and especially among poor people, broadly speaking, and black and brown folk. The latest estimates indicate that as many as 13 million American children live in food insecure homes. Like, food insecurity is a euphemism. People are hungry. Kids are hungry. It means 13 million kids live in homes where they or other members of their families have to go hungry if you make it to old age. It's still rough out there. Older Americans are currently experiencing housing insecurity and homeless rates not seen in decades. That people are 65 years and older are the fastest growing population of unhoused people is the latest sign of the intensifying brutality of economic life in the United States. Today's economy is such that older adults, especially the poorest and racial and ethnic minorities, are forced to choose each month, which of their fundamental needs they'll meet and which they'll neglect. In the housing literature, cost burden and severely cost burden mean that households spend 30% or more, or 50% or more respectively of their income on housing costs. So nearly a third of renters over 50 are severely housing cost burden. The poorest spend half as much on food and medicine compared to their low-income counterparts who don't share the same housing cost burden. So that's like the life cycle, right? Maternal mortality rates, really bad. I failed to mention that Americans are also like working class and sort of middle income Americans, or poor Americans especially, are just living shorter lives. Make it to old age, there's a good chance, there's a 1 in 3 chance, right? That like homelessness is a thing that's on the table. So masses of people are going through life in the gutter. And it's in this context that, I left out. This is not fine. It's not, and I'll have to keep from crying. It's in this context that where I find myself as a writer, and I find myself as a believer and a person living through this, that I have to answer the question of why religion, why politics, why revolt is a posture that makes sense. Whatever we say about faith, about God, about the universe, has to meet people there, where they're living, has to identify with people, has to work to get them out of the gutter, has to ensure that no one takes their place there. Our faiths have to let people know that they're not crazy for being repulsed by the indignities that they experience. Our religious traditions, whatever they might be, have to point them in the direction of the forces that are actually responsible for that. And we have to take their side. So the reason why I wanted to start this media project, Religion and Revolt, with my colleague Olga Marina Segura, and the reason why the posture is one of revolt, is because it sure feels like the conditions of the world are revolting against us. It sure feels like to forego political engagement would be escapist at best. The pervasiveness of human and ecological need is pulling everyone, all of us, into political life, whether we like it or not. It sure feels like our values and ideas and institutions need to renew themselves in order to even make sense today. At the same time, it also feels like what's happening most frequently is that these same institutions and people are putting the onus on individuals to go back to some imagined past, right? Where we were just better somehow. And that's how we'll save ourselves. And this isn't just a tendency among religious people and institutions. So folks with all sorts of spiritualities and none at all are lapsing into this kind of moralistic thinking. So one of my favorite corners of social media is traditional TikTok and YouTube. So I have these ongoing insecurities that as a nearsighted city kid, if it ever really goes down, I'm just not gonna make it. I'm wearing contacts today, so you can't tell, but I'm one accident. One glasses breaking accident from not making it, right? And so, when I should be sleeping or working on a presentation, not this presentation, this one was done early. I'll be up early, I'll be up late, I should say, until it's early. Looking at videos about which mushrooms I should pick for a good meal versus which ones are for a good time versus which ones are for a really, really bad time. And so in this segment of you end up in these wormholes on social media or on YouTube. And so side by side with these get back to earth or learn how to homestead or raise your own chickens, right? I'm really trying to get down there. But side by side with that is the sort of the trad wife, the traditional wife and traditional husband kind of crowd, and that gets suggested to me. And it's making a huge resurgence, right? Especially among people who are way too young to have an actual memory of single income households. And so, they'll be what's wrong with America today is, women are working full-time jobs and not taking care of households like they used to back in the day when men were men and women were women. Now, they won't tell you which day exactly that was. Because they can't, right, mostly. Because it's an unimportant detail, right? All the details are unimportant. So it doesn't matter that the economic math doesn't add up, that people are paid a smaller share of the wealth that they generate for employers than in generations past. It also doesn't matter, and this is kind of like a hyper online thing, it also doesn't matter that content creation itself is a job, right? And so like, it'll be someone making like dozens of videos a week telling you about how they don't have a job, right? Editing and producing and all that stuff, right? Forget that. What matters is like the aesthetic or the presentation of something that feels both traditional and right and safe. So long as we somehow get that magical shot of like this white girl waking up in bed with her hair combed somehow, no boogers in her eyes, light makeup done, not much. Right? Like just enough to cover up like blemishes and pimples that really don't exist, if we're being honest. And like narrating her day-to-day life as a 24-year-old stay-at-home wife in this like peacefully monotone voice. Every day, without a sound, I wake up at precisely 6:53 a.m. thanks to the silent alarm in my head, so as not to disturb Jake's last 7 minutes of sleep. I like to make some herbal tea and write in my gratitude journal before fixing his breakfast of steak and eggs to the side of steak. He's a grown boy, a 31-year-old who needs his protein. Right, like that kind of stuff, right? And it's like, I don't want to like diminish. I don't want to poke too much fun at like that, because I get the urge, right, to seek safety and seek familiarity in something that's missing. And this is as good as any other suggestion. And I also don't want to diminish the value of the past. At St. Peter's, my studies were full of mostly dead people. And I loved it. And I still do. Instead, my point is that even if those worlds existed, and most of the time, they didn't, there's no going back to them. Our task instead is to create a world that is sustainable and livable for us today, and in which the people who will come after us can flourish. Even if we wanted to go back to some version of, things are worse today because people are morally worse today, you can't really do that in a way that makes a ton of sense. The economic, political, and social conditions that we live under make it really hard to live well. If you think about a good moral life as a garden that you cultivate over time, the soil in which we find ourselves is hostile to that. And that's something that the sort of hunker down and be personally better approach just doesn't account for. Whether it's, sort of strictly religious and moralistic account, or the sort of secular returns to tradition. I was making fun of the sort of, 24-year-old stay-at-home, but not really stay-at-home wives. But if you're a philosophy or classics nerd, you'll be both pleased and horrified to know that Stoicism has made a popular comeback. I don't know, I'm also on Gym Bro TikTok and YouTube, and it's a bunch of it's really young dudes who are just we need to embrace the Stoic past. Yes, life sucks, but don't do anything about it. You just get better. You get more grizzly and get more tough and man up. And all that just sort of misses the point. Yes to resilience, by the way. But come on. Everyday people are beat down and struggling to meet their basic needs. There are common, predictable maladaptations and adaptations to sustain hardship. So for example, we know that across cultures we see significant associations between increases in domestic violence and increased male unemployment or increased female dependence, economic dependence on men, right? So if we want to see a world with less intimate partner violence, or where people, there are fewer people who struggle with substance abuse, which is another really predictable consequence of mass unemployment and underemployment, then we need to create a world in which women have full human autonomy, and where people's day-to-day lives don't brutalize them to the point where they depend on being numbed with substances just to make it to the next day, right? It's easy to wag our fingers in moral judgment and simply say, be better people, but it's much harder to actually do something about it. We should be fighting for a society where it's easier for people to live good, virtuous lives. But the conditions we live under right now just sort of crush people under their weight, I should say, and disintegrate families and communities. But it doesn't have to be this way. And these aren't abstractions, right? These are most often policy decisions. For instance, I've spent the last handful of years in leadership in a multi-faith community organizing group, the Greater Hartford Interfaith Action Alliance. And one of the first campaigns that we undertook after our public launch was to pass clean slate legislation, which, after a period of time of remaining crime-free, would seal people's criminal records up to a certain level of seriousness. And so in effect, it would just automate the pardons process. New Jersey passed a clean slate actually before we did in Connecticut. And the impetus for this came from community members whose lives are bogged down by years-old records. Because in most states, it's perfectly legal to discriminate against someone on the basis of their having a criminal record. So nationally, for instance, 90% of employers, 80% of landlords, 60% of colleges and universities use background checks in the recruiting process. In short, we wag our fingers at formerly incarcerated people and tell them, come back into society and do better, right? Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But at every single turn in the process, we try to take away their boots. Again, so much of life for everyday working people is bound up with unnecessary, sustained, organized hardship. In this instance, we came together with advocates and faith communities across the state to pressure our elected officials to pass this legislation that today has the potential, with the parameters that we has the potential to help about 277,000 people across the state of Connecticut. Connecticut's this big. It's 3.1 million people. Where am I on my slides? Okay. So I'd like to begin winding down with the question of the subtitle, Finding God in a Burning World. Where do we find God in this mess? The short answer is everywhere, if we're open. But sometimes the answer everywhere can feel like nowhere, right? So I'll hone in on one place that is particularly special to me. So last summer, I wrote an essay for Religion and Revolt about a really powerful coalition of immigrant and labor organizers in New Orleans who were celebrating a major victory. one of the members, Lillian Chinchilla, was one of over 150 workers who marched towards the New Orleans Superdome on July 11. Sorry. It was absolutely electric. The article and the rally are a link to the full rally are up on Religion and Revolt. It was beautiful. So for nearly an hour, again, it's July in New Orleans. For nearly an hour in damp New Orleans heat, worker after worker spoke about the impact of their organizing, that their organizing would have on their lives and the lives of workers across the country. Chinchilla's former employer, Bayou Demolition, routinely stole wages, denied overtime pay, sexually harassed undocumented female employees, and threatened undocumented workers with both physical violence and the violence of the government if they dared to report these abuses. Louisiana subcontractors like Bayou Demolition have relied on the labor of an underclass of migrant workers since Hurricane Katrina to rebuild the city. So in January 2023, the Department of Homeland Security introduced a new policy to protect migrant workers from abuse. Those who experience or even witness workplace abuse at the hands of an employer. The provision would automatically protect complainants from immediate deportation or the revocation of their work permits. Because as I said, employers would simply say, like, if you tell anybody, I'm gonna call ICE, or I'm gonna call CPB and have you deported. So this is meant to be a stopgap measure against that. The coalition of workers and organizers, they leverage this newly expanded whistleblower protection to organize among themselves, to conduct interviews and gather information in order to win these protections for several of their comrades who had been experiencing abuse. So I want to show a bit of this sort of clip. I hope you can see the subtitles because it's in English and Spanish.
Dale, dale protecciones, porque si no tienes, no chingan los patrones.
Estaba aquí enfrente del Superdome, ahí adentro experimentó abuso laboral por falta de pago, menores de edad trabajando, represalias y amenazas físicas en contra del grupo de trabajadores que han trabajado ahí por meses sin overtime.
Sexual abuse, harassment by employers, harassment by managers.
Muchas veces aquí los que los amenazan es los encargados pues, de los trabajos. Aquí un maltrato para las mujeres, para quererlos callar, intimidar. No te metas con esa persona o porque tiene gente mala a tu alrededor.
Fueron así muchos abusos en el aspecto de que no nos daban la protección de vida, de que nos amenazaban.
Presidente Biden, la pregunta es, ¿y nosotros qué van a hacer para proteger a los trabajadores que trabajan en condiciones de explotación y que han sacado adelante este estado de Nuevo Orleans? No nos vamos a quedar callados, no vamos a dejarnos de explotar. We will not be silent anymore, no nos vamos a callar.
Hubo amenazas, hubo mucha represalia contra mi persona, pero así, seguí, porque yo quería luchar, quería ganar.
Actuar con valentía, sin esconderse.
Estamos aquí porque ganamos la carta de apoyo para acción de medida y también ganaron su caso frente a la Comisión Laboral para su pago overtime. Todavía están investigando la represalia.
Me siento tan honrada de poder estar este día con ustedes dándoles este anuncio. Para Familias Unidas en Acción ha sido meses de lucha junto con un grupo de trabajadores que dijeron, ya basta.
Que mi voz se escuche.
Los silencios
But like, so this is a sort of obviously like their like highlight reel, but not captured here is the sort of lengthy like sort of press conference and rally that they had. At one point, Lillian, and I don't know if you saw like a woman talking with a small child next to her. That was Lillian. She remarked, quote, "Because we're undocumented, we think we have no rights. But actually, yes, we do. We have to speak out more because these companies will continue to abuse us." It was through that struggle and the relational power that propelled them to victory that these people gained beautiful insights into the dignity of human life, of work, of their human rights, and the world that they were co-creating with their families, and for their families. In 20 years, which again, that's really weird to say, of study and practice, I've never come close to that level of clarity and insight. I think God is revealed in that labor in a special way in these times, because that work is so urgent and everyone is needed to participate in some tangible, direct way. At the same rally, the co-founder of Familias Unidas en Acción, Mario Mendoza, he concluded his remark saying, "Today, I'm happy because I know that innumerable workers without papers can say, we have rights. And when the people say this, it's not out of the conviction, it's out of the conviction that we have fought for a community and will keep fighting to empower our families." So through their active participation in the struggle with their friends and community members, they came to know that they were fighting for more than just money. And here I think we see a vision of what it means to be human in conditions that thrive on really inhuman submissiveness. I think we see people like this, and in other movements, I just wanted to highlight them, right? Filled with the divine breath that connects us to everything and to everyone. They resisted the atomization that oppressive systems impose on us. When told that they were completely alone, that they had no rights because of their citizenship, they built up power among themselves and with folks who were sympathetic to them. They insisted on solidarity when isolation was the only thing offered to them. You know, deep loneliness is one of the hallmarks of social life today. And against this backdrop of near universal like social isolation that long preceded the pandemic lockdowns, everyday people are building transformative relationships through collective action and shared reflection. At the same time, the deepening of relationships enriches the content of their actions and reflections in this cyclical way. At the heart of the movement and movements like it are some ideas that are core to Catholic social teaching, and that I've kind of been speaking around and speaking to indirectly. One is this notion of the common good, and the other is the option for the poor. That there are goods that make human and ecological life possible, right? And when we think about how we access them and how we distribute them, somehow that we ought to put people who are most vulnerable socially, politically, physically, should be the first among equals, right? That God loves us, everyone, but a special love for those who are vulnerable, right, is a sort of theological claim, and then an ethical one, that we're meant to emulate that in our interpersonal dealings. And a third, communal claim, right? That we're meant to create communities, and a political one, that we're meant to organize policies in a way that reflect that ethos. Some versions of something like these ideas are shared with other religious traditions, and they animate both religious and non-religious social movements. But part of what moved me and why I choose to highlight like these, like this sort of moment in particular, was that they knew that they weren't just fighting for themselves and their families, right? Each of them flagged like, this is a thing that will help workers across the country, right? Undocumented folks or not will benefit from this. They recognize that, if they were vulnerable to extra exploitation and workplace abuse due to their citizenship status, that very fact degrades the dignity of work for other working people. That your work and mine, that your life and mine are connected to theirs. That we have a shared interest in acting as though our fates were connected. And this isn't just some wishy-washy, hippie, we're all connected, man. Not entirely, because we're all connected, man, right? It is. But more, right, that we have a political interest in securing a minimal shared good, given our shared vulnerability to life. I don't have to tell people who finished high school in a pandemic. Shit happens, right? It's not an exaggeration to say that the lives of huge swaths of the population of human and non-human animals are at stake in our struggles for ecological justice and peace in particular. It's in those struggles that the best of our religious traditions will also be revealed, because we've been thrust into confrontation with magnificent crises. But we still have hope. And we have a hope that is informed by and that shapes our struggles for a more just, verdant world. There is a community of Christian thinkers and theologians and lay people, clergy in Bethlehem, and they produced something they call the Kairos document 10 years ago. And they set up hope towards its conclusion. Hope within us means first and foremost our faith in God, and secondly, our expectation, despite everything, for a better future. Thirdly, it means not chasing after an illusion. We realize that release is not close at hand. Hope is the capacity to see God in the midst of trouble and to be co-workers with the Holy Spirit who is dwelling in us. And I return to that and I conclude with that because they too, they spoke about more than their situation under occupation. Their hope takes on a religious significance, and I think hope generally does, when believers imagine themselves to be collaborators, not just with their neighbors, but with God as well. Not waiting for some magical intervention, not waiting for relief to come from the outside and solve every problem for them. That's never happened. Unlikely. Religious hope is a vision of God and neighbor right there in the muck with you. It's the activity of this hope that we recreate. It's through this activity of hope that we recreate ourselves, that we recreate each other, and that we create a new world that isn't so mired in want and despair and resignation. That world is waiting for you. Thank you.